I'm Roy Fisher. I live in Whitley Woods, but I've only lived in Whitley Woods since we were married. I belong to Preston, really. My birth, 1921, 1st of July, 1921 I was born. And that's about it. I've lived a very sheltered life until 1939, and then it changed.
And what happened to you personally in 1939?
Well, 1939, I was supposed to go up to university at Manchester, and I went to enroll in the usual way at the end of 39, beginning of 40, and I didn't like the idea, so I went out of the university straight across the road in Oxford Street and joined the army.
Which unit did you join?
First of all, I joined an armoured division, which was the tank regiment, really. But my training was done in Wiltshire at Warminster, which was the Army Armoured Corps centre. And there I sort of came involved with the 3rd Hussars. The 3rd Hussars were a regular regiment of cavalry belonging to a yeomanry brigade. So we had the Wiltshire Yeomanry and the Warwickshire Yeomanry. And when I went into the army, I sort of, straight away, like a lot of us young people did, I sort of put my name forward for a commission. But before I could get sort of enrolled into that, I was shipped off from Liverpool in a convoy to the Middle East. So I went out to the Middle East in 1940, end of 1940, and remained there more or less as a trooper and whatnot, in tanks, with old tanks. There we had Matildas, and then we got Grants, and then we got Shermans. But then we had other tanks which were called Crusaders, which were a very fast tank. And for the next 2 years, until the middle of July 1942, my life was spent rushing up and down the desert. We were only fighting the Italians then, and the Italians their heart wasn't in it. So the Italians weren't terribly good soldiers, you know. And so we were bashing up and down the desert at Tobruk, Saloum, Mersa Matruh, until about June 1942, Rommel had got into the war by then, because Europe was pretty well taken over. Rommel then came involved, and he brought forward his panzer divisions, which were a different kettle of fish altogether. And we then had to beat a hasty retreat back to Knightsbridge, the big tank battle at Knightsbridge, because we were under then with Wavell, Ritchie and Auchinleck, and we were very fond of them until we got this young chap, Montgomery, came out in July, and he started knocking us all into shape. But at that time, the Americans came into the war, and we got brand new tanks. We got Shermans, Grant tanks, and we retreated then back behind the lines at Alamein. And then we left a lot of mines all over the place, and everybody moved back behind the Ruisat Ridge at Alamein. And we spent the next sort of 2 months, 3 months, sort of pretending to do battle. We were doing set pieces. And then October the 23rd came along, and we moved up to Alamein itself. And at 9:30, all hell broke loose. The biggest barrage that we've had in the whole time there. The whole sky was illuminated with this artillery barrage that was going on. And the next thing we knew, we were being guided through the minefields, through on Star Track and Moon Track and whatnot, to take over the ridge. And we were there till about the 1st or 2nd week in November About 10 days we were there, holding out in this box, and that wasn't very pleasant.
Were you commissioned at this time, or were you still a trooper?
I was still a trooper. It happened very sadly, really, because I lost a lot of good friends at Alamein. And then, because my regiment was then depleted, we were pulled out, and the new fresh troops went forward. So we were pulled back and eventually went to Italy. And when we landed in Italy, after Cassino, I was at Cassino and Salerno. And after that, my papers came through for my commission. So I was shipped off home pretty smartly to go to Sandhurst and do a commission there. And then after doing that short commission, I rejoined my regiment, which was another regiment really, and we then were supposed to be going to the Far East, but Singapore and everything packed up. And so I went back to Europe, by which time D-Day had happened in 1944, and I went back into Europe, then back through Italy, and I actually walked from Florence back to Naples during the war, but hitchhiking and walking back. And then from there, I was shipped off with my regiment back to Middle East. So I stayed in the Middle East chasing the Stern Gang and people like that.
So where were you on VE Day in 1945?
I was just on the point of going back to Europe on VE Day, because I said we were supposed to be going to Far East. Then the Europe fell, of course. We went, it became sort of, the war in Europe finished more or less, VE Day. And we were shipped off back through Europe into the northern part of Italy. And then I walked down through Italy to get back to the Middle East. When
the war finished, how long did you remain in the army?
I came out of the army in 1947. So I stayed in until 47, by which time I was a captain. I was a lieutenant in the beginning straight away with the Yorkshire Hussars, which were a yeomanry regiment. And then I moved back to the Middle East with the tank regiment, the 8th Tanks. And I stayed with the tanks until I was demobbed in 1947.
When you were demobbed, did you come back to Chorley? And what did you do then?
I came back to Preston when I was demobbed, and I was completely lost. I didn't know what to do at all. And I thought about joining the Territorials, but then I met a man who was the chief scout, and he persuaded me to become a scout commissioner. So I became a scout commissioner, and I've been a commissioner now for 50-odd years. But it changed, my whole direction changed the war. If it hadn't been a war, I would have gone to university and done civil engineering, which I hated. I didn't want to do, because I'm no good at maths. But I had to be a civil engineer because my grandfather was a civil engineer. So, but the war came along. And then after the war, at the end of the war, the liaison officer said, well, what are you going to do? I said, well, I have no idea. And so he said, well, why don't you go back to university? So I said, okay, I'll go. So I went up to Oxford. I didn't do anything. I played rugger, and that was it. And then I became a town planner and an architect. I did my training and became an architect.
May I ask how the war personally affected you and your generation?
The war affected me very badly because I lost a lot of good friends, and I lost, there were a lot of battles which were quite frightening. One of the worst fears we had was in the tank not being able to get out. And I can still sort of hear men screaming in the tank when they're being brewed up and the ammunition going off. But being young, it doesn't, you know, these things pass. It's only afterwards that you start thinking back about it. And that's why today I don't think back at all. I don't think, no, I just, the war had gone. It was a time of my life, and I'm not a man to wander around with medals and all that stuff and shout no. Because I had a very busy life. After the war, it changed again because with my involvement with scouting, and then also a lot of voluntary work. I became president of St. John and became a magistrate, and you know, all this. I was chairman of 2 prisons at one time, and then I became the High Sheriff of Lancashire. So but Ken and I enjoyed that, and then I became a deputy lieutenant. I'm still a deputy lieutenant.
Roy, Mayor, thank you very much for sharing your memories with us today. It's very much appreciated.
It's a pleasure.